So I'm going to talk about the role of scriptwriters in tackling the culture of consumption, because I think, governments can regulate and businesses can design greener products, but actually it's excessive high carbon consumption that is at the heart of our climate and biodiversity crisis. And there's not much getting away from that. And I think previous speakers have helped me along on that one. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the research, but I'm going to focus much more on what that means for scriptwriters and writers in general. So I'll mention a little bit about the Albert Planet Placement Report, because it talks a lot about, do we talk about the climate in fiction and in stories? But I think the more interesting point is actually when we see someone put on, get in a car without a seatbelt or drop litter, it's a marker of something bad in their character or their behaviour. But if we see someone jumping on a private jet or eating tons of burgers, mostly not eating, they just order them, don't they? No one ever eats in fiction. They just order it and then leave it. It's not linked to any of the environmental impacts. And the longer we stop, we refrain from joining those dots, the more peril we put humanity in. And quite frankly, if America, uses 6 planets per person on average, and the UK 3 or 4, then probably the fictional world uses about 20. So that's what I want to address. And stage 1, I guess, the first thing is make sure you're not implicitly promoting a culture of high consumption. Because we learn through 2 ways. One is like what you're doing now. You're consciously listening to me and taking in information. But a much more pervasive form of learning is just absorbing from what other people do. And those other people include fictional characters. So you have sort of cultivation theory emerges from the 60s, and it really proposes, with a lot of evidence to back it up, that the more we're exposed to television and the adverts between the programs, the greater our consumption and the greater we kind of, absorb the kinds of aspirations and behaviours and norms and values that we see on our screens. In fiction too, there's a thing called narrative transportation, where you're so involved in what the character's doing, you kind of implicitly identify with their aims and objectives. It's what makes a good story. But if their aims and objectives are to wear a different outfit every day of the week and go around in sports cars and private jets and order huge burgers and not eat them, that's problematic. Yeah, and we've seen a lot of changes now. You look back at 70s sitcoms and, you cringe, don't you, at the racism and the sexism. I watched a film the other day, just 7 years old, called The Way, Way Back, about a kid with an obnoxious stepdad who, takes refuge working in a water park. And there's a scene where this guy kind of teaches him that when you get pretty girls in bikinis wanting to go down the slide, you make them wait so you can eye them up. And I didn't enjoy that when I saw it first time round. But the second time round I saw it, the other week, it struck me as deeply problematic. And I'm wondering, will consumerism on screen become the new racism, the new sexism? I think perhaps it should. So it's a conversation maybe we need to start now. So there's lots of evidence. I'm not going to sort of talk too much about it. It's not an academic one. But there's loads of studies that have shown increases in consumption that relate to television viewing, that show aspirations of viewers match those of their characters. So let's have a look at some of the ones. We've got Homer Simpson. He does actually eat his burgers. We've got hacks there about comedians. They gather around by private jet. Lucifer, well, I guess he's the devil, so perhaps we can forgive him his fast cars and conspicuous consumption. We've got, pretty well every heroine has a different outfit each day. So there's Carrie from Sex and the City, there's Emily in Paris. My son's girlfriend, I said, what do you see when you see Carrie's walk-in wardrobe? And she said, I see goals. And I thought, oh my goodness, it is like that. But it doesn't have to be that way. I don't just want to point out the problem. Emily in Paris is about a sparky girl, gets the beautiful backdrop of Paris, sexy French boyfriend, kind of-ish, on and off as they are. And she's basically promoting fast fashion. She could just as easily be promoting these new fashion swaps, vintage, pre-loved. You don't need to use any of that to get a good story. So Positive role models. I mean, I've struggled. I've been talking about this for 6 months. This is all I've come up with. Everyone says the good life, but they're kind of countercultural. You want something that norms just a low-carbon lifestyle. Jack Reacher, he may seem odd because he kills people, but they're mostly baddies, but he travels by bus. And, and he shops in thrift shops, so he's not so bad. My favourite is actually, I don't know if anyone's seen The Detectorist. Who's seen that? I love it. It's really lyrical. It's not explicitly green at all, but it engenders love of nature just by the way it's shot. Lance, even though he's actually secretly rich, lives on a diet of vegetable curry, and Andy gets this sort of really rubbish job having to spray pesticides on grass verges. But he takes pity on all the wildflowers and bees and butterflies, and he just sprays water instead. So he's quietly subversive. I love him. So it's sad that this is all I could come up with. If anyone's got any others, let me know afterwards. But here's an example of how you can do it right, and this was mentioned in a previous talk as well, that when Love Island decided that they were going to deck out all their participants in second-hand clothes, and it really led to a shift in people taking that up. So it's easy enough to rectify. We don't have to always be implicitly promoting high consumption. So I said there was a lot of research out there showing how television and fictional role models affect us, but it's mostly correlational or experimental. I don't know any studies where we've actually asked people, do you know the carbon footprint of the characters you identify with? Do you think that matters? Do you think it affects you? So I'm doing some research with Rubber Republic. If you don't know who they are, check out their website and watch some of their videos. They're brilliant at doing really funny, witty, viral videos. And we're going to sort of engage them with some really fun Insta tiles and then ask them to click on it and join our research where we'll just ask them that question. Do you think it affects you? So we'd like to work with the people in this area, with BAFTA, with Albert, with media companies and so on, to help spread the word, and also we'll feed back our research to your writers and producers. So this is the kind of thing we're going to be doing, and so Fleabag's not so bad. She's actually below the national average. James Bond, well, you need a lot of planets for all that jet setting around. So it's just to start the conversation, really. So I guess my call to action for stage 1 is basically stop showing excessively high carbon consumption in a way that makes it aspirational, just what not to do, quite simply. I do regular workshops on such topics, happy to help. So I think Gabby and Jeremy were talking about upskilling. I'm happy to help. Help us again with the social media campaign and research. Look out for hashtag climate characters. We're going to be kicking that off in a month or so. So, stage 2, actively use positive role models. So, I've done a bit of research here. So, I used to teach business ethics, and I taught stuff on the typical way you do it is you talk about ethical business scandals, what went wrong, and oh, isn't that bad? And then I found out that someone thought I was telling them how to be bad to make profit. And that was my first clue that what I think I'm teaching isn't necessarily what they're hearing. So I thought, here's an opportunity for some reflection and research. So I broke them into 2 classes. One I exposed to positive role models of ethical businesses, and the other I carried on. Anyway, I found very clear results. The positive role models were much more likely to lead to more ethical intentions. So, and actually, I had also entrepreneurship students work with social enterprises, and that inspired them sometimes for complete change of direction, the kind of change of direction that Jonathan was talking about when he came to the I, We, Planet thing. So, and the way our brains work is actually having a moral exemplar, as they call it, or a sort of template, is much more effective at behaviour change than fiddling around with people's attitudes. It just goes straight to the heart of how we absorb information. So I also followed that up with some research into short stories, because I became a bit worried that pretty well everything on our screens and in our books that referred in any way to the climate or the future was negative. And I thought, well, is this actually such a good idea? So I got about 100 odd people. They read 2 short stories that were catastrophic, 2 short stories that had solutions at the heart of them. And again, the findings were absolutely clear. The negative ones gave rise to something should be done. or I switched off and turned off. I didn't like it. The positive ones is, wow, that's really inspiring. Now I see what I can do. There were no negative ones. So yes, catastrophic stories will inspire some, but they'll switch just as many off. Whereas the positive ones with role models are uniformly inspiring. So part of that I set up, that's what inspired me, I think, to set up the Green Stories writing competitions, because most cli-fi, and I'm sure Lauren will back this up, is catastrophic. And I know as a psychologist that fear doesn't always lead to the responses you hope for. So you've got all these wonderful writers thinking they're changing the world for the better, but when people are scared, sometimes they just switch off. It all goes into anxiety, or they become self-protective. Look after number one, I'll buy all the loo rolls. You know, that's not really the kind of behaviour you want, is it? So I put loads of green solutions up there. I asked writers to embed them in their stories. Most of them just raised awareness. Very few of them actually had solutions. So in desperation, I wrote my own Habitat Man, based on a real-life green garden consultant who'd given up his job in the city to help people make their gardens wildlife friendly. And I thought of it at first as a series. I thought it could be something like, you know, All Creatures Great or Small, or, you know, where they go to a different garden each week and you have an overarching plot. But I wrote it as a book first, but I still think it would make a great Sunday evening series, a bit along the likes of All Great and Small or Detectorists. So anyway, he's going around these different gardens, he falls in love, he digs up a body. So what a nice way then to talk about natural burials. You know, so, you know, I think someone said previously, it's not enough to talk about deforestation. What do we do? Well, for a start, you don't use mahogany coffins. There's a start. So I've done some research. Well, I haven't done it. The English department has, and the University of Utah have done some research on readers' responses to Habitat Man. And 50 read it through, and 98%, I just got them through last month, 98% of people adopted at least one green behaviour or green alternative as a result of reading it. Wildlife gardening obviously was big, natural burials, several said they changed their will, and my hero has an epiphany in a composting toilet, which proved to be surprisingly inspirational. Another one, this didn't come through the Green Stories competition, but I will do a shout out for Green Rising. It's got, if I was going to be putting money into a series for young adults, it's got everything. It's got romance, drama, family drama, tragedy. It's got superpowered teenagers, which are really in. And it also, the plot broadly focuses on these teenagers who sort of green stuff grows out of their hands and they can do wonderful things with nature. And there's an evil guy trying basically to siphon off all the funds for renewable energy to, I mean, Lauren will tell me if I got this wrong, to go off to Mars and start a new colony. Now, I like it because, for me, one of the biggest threats to addressing our climate crisis is this off-world fantasy. Now, I love Star Trek. It used to be one of the only positive versions of the future you could see. But when it inspires people to think that we can escape by going to other planets, I really do, I mean, I would bet my new EV that if you put your money into that, I get the argument that it creates innovation that can be used for many uses, but I would be much more likely, I think, for it to be giving holidays to people like Jeff Bezos, for the man who has everything, and siphoning off funds and resources where we most need it. I think it's a dangerous fantasy. But there are arguments both sides. What worries me is that in the cultural realm, we've got Elon Musk, who, I mean, my son adores, so I mustn't say anything in case he's watching. He's all right, really. But a lot of people adore, and he's brought a lot of goodwill, but I'm very worried about this. I would like something else in the cultural realm that says, actually, there are also things to worry about here, so we can have that debate, so it's not so one-sided. Because at the moment, it's only the dry, dusty academics who are worried about it. I think in the media, everyone's like, yay! What a lovely idea. So, call to action. Commission series that show positive role models. Habitat Man, Green Rising. I've got plenty of others from the Green Stories writing project. So, for example, we run an Eco-Santa short story. It's just flash fiction. But one last year had the idea of Santa getting toys from a toy hospital rather than a toy story. And I love that idea because it's kind of circular economy, isn't it? And who's the biggest, most globally recognized figure ever? It's Father Christmas. But is he bringing us peace and love? No, he's bringing us a ton of stuff. So, did Santa used to be green and they made him red to fit with Coca-Cola? Or was it the other way around? I can't remember the other rebrand, I don't know. Either way, let's reclaim Santa, yeah? Let's have a family warming, heartfelt Christmas movie where it's not all about stuff. Maybe, I mean, I'm really worried about eco-anxiety. It's a big, big deal. So I'm not into the business of let's make it scare everyone. But maybe you could have a film about some kids who are scared. You know, most of them are. And perhaps they're, you know, talking to some therapists and they say, well, maybe do something that might help. And perhaps they look at Christmas, see how hard their parents are working to afford presents, and then most of it just goes to waste, or they don't want it, or they send it back, and they think, hang on, is this still all right? Didn't we just watch that poor drowning whale, which still makes me cry every time I see it, documentary? Is this still okay? And they campaign, perhaps, to move away from consumer Christmas. And perhaps business doesn't like it, but then they think, well, sod it, actually. I mean, I was part of a paper showing product returns are so high these days, it's barely worth making a sale. So maybe they lean into it. Maybe Amazon say, well, fine, let's become an Amazon of borrowing. People are using it as an informal form of borrowing anyway. Maybe you have these young protagonists on the one show, you know, they're new Greta Thunbergs, and they've made a real difference. I mean, how many kids would love to watch that? I'd watch that movie, you know, and the next Christmas, you know, the biggest present is a year's membership to the sports department or the fashion library or the tool library. Change the culture to one of borrowing and bringing back. With just one Santa movie, if there's any producers with money out there. Stage 3, show positive solutions. So let's talk about some research. There's a lot of anxiety that's out there. We need to harness some of that towards positive solutions. I'm really, really worried about it, and I think it's only going to get worse. And it's rational. That's the thing. It's not your normal anxiety, oh, I'm too fat, too thin. No, it's existential. It's personal for the young people. So I did a bit of research here, back to some research, where I was worried about the news. So I exposed people to different versions of the same news story. One was how plastic is killing animals in our oceans, and you've seen an example. One was about ocean clear-up campaigns, and I did one on different types of topics. And you won't be surprised to know that the negative ones, basically the traditional news ones, gave rise to more anxiety, despair, pessimism, especially among female respondents, actually. But you might be surprised to know, because it's counterintuitive, that the solution-based ones were much more effective at inspiring active intentions to change. When I asked them, how likely are you to become more environmentally friendly, campaign, donate, make your opinions known, the solution ones were way more likely to. And this was replicated across many different populations using both qualitative and quantitative. But yet, most of the news, most of the fiction, most of the films are basically disaster-based. So we need to harness and allay this eco-anxiety via visions of success. It's personal for me, quite frankly. I heard this global survey that 47% of people of childbearing age said they weren't going to have children because they were scared. And I thought, that's got to be rubbish. I've got to check the source. And then my son said, no, I'm not having any. And I'm like, what? Hang on a minute, I need you to wipe my ass when I'm 90. It's, you can't, this is personal now. So, you know, it's an issue. We need to take that eco-anxiety, and we need to harness it. We need to show them positive solutions, not fantasies. Now, my area is sustainability. I can imagine future societies, what they might look like. I can work with writers, and we've had some great stories come through the Green Stories Project. So, for example, Unfrozen by Lou Reed won our Novel Prize. And he imagines someone waking up in 2062 and he's been cryogenically frozen. He's like, oh my word, how did that happen? How have I lost 40 years? So there's the mystery at the heart. There's the entertainment. You know, his kids are now older than him. But it's also a lovely opportunity to see what society might look like. You know, obviously everything's renewable, no private vehicles, public on-demand transport, carbon credit cards where we all have our own carbon ration, a sharing economy. And you can play out all these systemic and technical solutions that are the kinds of things we need to get that rapid drop that Jonathan Wyvers was talking about without actually anyone suffering that much. So, really good idea there. Visco by David Fell, I think, would make a great series. So he imagines an alternative society springing up by accident, where you have this big festival on the Isle of Dogs, and then a university research department gets together with a big brand CSR department and say, let's having an inclusion thing. And all the carers and the cared for can be part of it, and we'll set it up with technology, and they can be part of it. And they do that, and then they don't want to go home. And so it becomes this sort of intentional community that they can't disrupt. And then there's the outside forces, the evil ones trying to stop them, and they fight back. And, we've got 3 story arcs on there, 3 seasons worth of stuff. The Field by Adrian Ellis is a really fun one, little ones where they imagine that something happens where if anyone does anything that's not environmentally friendly, they feel sick and nauseous. So you've got your stoner couple, your middle-class couple who employ a cleaner to employ someone to do all the nasty stuff that makes them sick. You've got a minister, you've got a rich guy. It's funny, yeah, but it also is a really nice way to share green practices and products. I've been working on an anthology with lots of authors recommended by Lauren through her Climate Fiction Writers League. We target it initially at COP27. It's just being finished this month, where we've got climate solutions wrapped up in lovely stories. And they're there to inspire people, and it's very activism-based. It would make a lovely, like Black Mirror, it would make a lovely Green Mirror series. So I wrote one of them myself, The Assassin, which pictures 8 people in a citizens' jury, itself a climate solution because it encourages long-term decision-making beyond the electoral cycle, not by people with vested interests. And it goes through all the different climate solutions, but one of them is an assassin, and we don't know who. So all these lovely stories are here. If any of them inspire you, come and talk to me, because I've got access to the stories. There's some really good ones, and I reckon it wouldn't be too hard to get some money together either to make some of these things happen. So, final call to action. Avoid portraying high carbon consumption as aspirational. Help us with our research, with our social media campaign, to find out how what people think. Does it affect them? Look out for the hashtag climate characters. Commission series and films that show positive role models, like Habitat Man, like Green Rising, like that new Santa movie. I've basically done the plot, you can have it for nothing. Commission series and films that show visions of a positive society that's sustainable and how we might get there. Yeah, let's not have every vision of the future catastrophic. So thank you very much. And I've written my own little story called The Awards Ceremony, which is about someone who's cancelled for doing, I've given away the plot now, cancelled for doing high consumption stuff, and then wins the Nobel Prize for Literature because her series has inspired so many changes in society. So that's a little free one. If anyone's interested in that, I'll send it to them. So thank you for your time. That's me.